Welcome to Mixed Media. We have already heard from me. I reviewed a piece by Nick O'Brien, a composer I found on Reddit, and his track Sunshine and Lasers. And we are going to be hearing from Irving, responding to hot takes from the internet.
Yeah. So I guess I'll just pull from the hat. So these are randomly taken. I haven't even seen the ones. Usually we pick for each other. We'll each pick one, and one for ourselves as well. So we'll have 3 hot takes. Since Nathan's not here, I had my producer wife, pull 2 for me. So I have not seen any of them, and I have no idea what they are. So here's to live reacting. Let's see what comes up first. Oh, that's not it. That's the music from last time. Okay, here it is. So this one says, as a film lover, Citizen Kane was the most incredibly boring film I have ever seen and does not deserve the praise that it gets. Ooh, so I'll say something, first before anyone calls me herd mentality or anything like that. I actually, with these classic films, I don't really go into them expecting much. I don't have a particular affinity to really any era in film. I think there are little golden nuggets in every era practically. I think maybe our current era is my least favorite. But besides that though, I'm not very particular in that sense. So this is not going to come from a place of it's classic, therefore I must defend it. But I will defend it because it's an amazing film. So I don't know. I mean, if you don't like character studies, I think you would definitely not like this film, so I could understand that. Let's read their reasoning. So they say, I think it's only famous for how much it did for the film industry at the time. If you're considering watching it, you're not missing out on much. It is incredibly dull and basically nothing happens. If you enjoyed it, good for you. Yeah, so I disagree entirely, because I also have this problem with films that are notorious, meaning that they did something really great for film, but it doesn't really hold with the test of time. Some of Hitchcock feels a little bit like that, the ones I didn't like as much. And you can see, okay, great, with something like The Birds, clearly this is important for VFX and practical effects and what can be done, and I mean it does a pretty good job for what it is capable of doing. And this whole thing about sulfur photography, that's really cool if you look at how they were able to film the birds and isolate them and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, cool stuff. But in terms of the film itself, I feel like it fell flat, and I'm not gonna, I'm not the kind of person who factors in the importance of it as much as I do really just how much do I like it? How good do I think it is independent of that, right? So yeah, so with Citizen Kane, I disagree in the sense that I really don't think anything about this film is particularly, and I'm also not the most familiar with the history of the film, although I did watch Mank, which is about the history of the film, but that film is terrible. That film is, not good. So I'm not sure how much I should rely on that knowledge. But, with this film, I think I really love the character explorations. The most interesting thing, it very much so reminds me of a little bit There Will Be Blood in the way that it explores the character. Very much so not letting you in anywhere, but more so communicating from outside the character, which I really like. It makes you really focused on every line, every piece of delivery that's coming across the screen, particularly from Orson Welles, who smashes it out of the park. Absolutely phenomenal performance. And the photography is freaking gorgeous. I don't even know what to say about the photography other than, I don't know if you're a film fan or not, but if you are, go back and just look at some of the frames and what implied meanings there are in motion, in set work, in transition, in every aspect. This is the exact kind of cinematography that I fall in love with, which is everything about the picture is telling a story, on their own in some ways, but also in conjunction with each other, creating this very beautiful picture. Even as simple as this one thing that sticks in my mind is the scene it's one of the climactic scenes, so I won't really talk about the exact details, but the camera pans over, following the character, and you think it's just doing tracking, right? Like you think it's just following the action, and it looks like that because it's been following this character, and we've been holding on the shot for a while. And then the actress, this is good blocking as well, good directing. The actress takes a little step back further than you normally would get, and we pan a little bit farther, and then there's this on the lower left side of the screen. At that moment, where the script needed that kind of image, there's a doll. It's perfect. So I won't explain the meaning of that, but that kind of filmmaking is stuff that I really love. So I kind of disagree, and I don't think that's because I expected it to be, something, incredible. I think it's deservedly well loved. I wouldn't put it in my top. I wouldn't put it in my top 3 probably, but for me personally. But I can see how people could, definitely. So disagree.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly when I watched it, I didn't watch it with, an eye for all those details like you did, because I can't do that. But yeah, I don't know. I really enjoy it. I don't think it's boring at all. Personally, I mean, I was quite interested in the development of the main character and figuring out, I mean, also just like on a really basic, level, my, non filmmaker appreciation, but like the way it opens is what creates this interest, right? Like you're at the end already at the beginning, and then you want to see how you get from the basically the end of the story, how you get to the end of the story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there's this like little, like it's just I think it's a great exercise in writing and directing and cinematography, just everything coming together to make this really beautiful thing. One thing also I forgot to mention about it is the writing. I've been talking about writing a lot, but the structure is very much so whatever it needed to be for the story. So the structure is made for the story instead of the story made for the structure, right? Which is a big mistake a lot of people make, especially in today's cinema. It's very obnoxious. You can feel the story being crammed into a structure, right? But in this case, the structure arises from the story instead. However many acts the story needed was however many acts. I don't remember. I didn't watch it like going, end of act, so I don't remember how many acts, but I have a feeling there are a lot of acts in this film, like maybe upwards of 7 or something like that, or it might be something like that if I went back and looked at it. But just the back and forth, and I won't bore you. Maybe I'll make a whole episode about it because I watched it rather recently, so I'll make an episode about Citizen Kane and what I loved about it. I'll probably buy it on Blu-ray. I watched it in the cinema, which was great asterisk. Audio system was freaking out, but whatever. So yeah, next take here. Let's see what we've got. So I think this one's from Ben. Can't read it right now, but Ben, do you want to give me an overview?
Yeah, so actually, this is from a thread saying, asking for people to list their, what are the most Oscar bait films out there. And there were some, interesting takes all around. I think the consensus is this movie, I don't even know, called Crash. It's like the biggest Oscar bait film of all time. Again, I've never seen it. I've never heard of it. Apparently it's from 2005. I don't know. But I thought this was an interesting take. So this person says, every Best Picture winner from the 80s besides Platoon was Oscar bait that worked. Amadeus is a masterpiece, but still sort of falls into Oscar bait. Terms of Endearment is bait that isn't too pretentious. Everything else is an oof. In particular, Ordinary People and Out of Africa. Redford just swinging for the fences in those. Driving Miss Daisy is straight, make old white people feel good trash. I'll throw Sophie's Choice in with these. It didn't win Best Picture, but I think it's quite similar, and it's sort of embarrassingly naked in its attempt to seem profound. Basically indicting all of the Best Picture Oscar films from the 80s. I can speak to none of them. Never seen any of these films, so.
Yeah, I mean, I don't care about the Academy enough to remember like what won and when and exactly, but I know what this person's talking about, and I agree with it mostly. I would think. I think. Well, I agree with it. Asterisk. I think the biggest thing is that not the whole cadre tends to be like that. Every year, there might be like one or two that are a little bit different. Do they tend to win? No. I think I covered this in the Oscars episode that we did a long time ago for the last Oscars. If you go check that out, I think I read from an article that describes the exact parameters that are required if you want to be the most perfect Oscar bait movie, and it's extremely accurate. Like, I mean, you could basically formulate, many films around just following the structure and then hopefully executing it very well. Right, of course you're going to need that part, but yes, I think that's very upsetting because it's kind of boring. Like, there's the types of films that you tend to be films that don't necessarily resonate with people who are outside of the Academy. I'm going to use Mank as the example. Like, that's an Academy film. Like,
I will see there's a lot of people mentioning Mank as well in the thread.
You couldn't get a more Oscar bait movie than Mank, right? It's got everything. It's got the story of its creation, like how Mank came to be, which is David Fincher. This was his passion project for so long. He's had the script forever, and he finally got. So what was I saying? So yeah, so Mank, it has the story of its creation. That's like, oh my gosh, like, David Fincher spent his... I respect that, by the way. I actually really like David Fincher's work. I think this work is particularly terrible, though. So, and it has the sort of pretentious air around it that really isn't in a lot of other... Actually, isn't in at all in any other David Fincher film, which is kind of bizarre when I was watching it. It just didn't feel like him. Didn't feel gritty and down to earth like he usually does. And so, there's that. And then, there's the fact that there's like a name, actors in there with big names. So it's Gary Oldman, and he's been around Hollywood forever, and everyone wants to give him an Oscar, that kind of thing. And Gary Oldman did a good job for what he was given. So yeah, I mean, he did a really great job, I would say, for what he was given. I don't think the film was bad because of him whatsoever. And so it has all the ingredients. Oh, it's got what did I forget? The political overtones that were just so heavy-handed that it made me feel like I was watching like a Twitter representation of reality unfold before me on the screen, which I was just like, oh, I was really relieved to find that every other Oscar film wasn't like that. I was scared. That was the first Oscar film I watched from last year, and I was really scared that every film was going to be like that. And I was like, oh, Lord, help me through these, oversimplifications of life happening from people who are clearly out of touch with it. So, that kind of appeals to the Academy. So yeah, if you're out there, Academy, watching this, and I'm up for an Oscar in the future, just ignore everything I said and give me the Oscar anyway. There you go. I don't think that'll happen, but... So yeah, I agree with it somewhat. I think it's kind of boring. Like Moonlight, yeah, that's... I don't think Moonlight was created like that. I wouldn't say that, but I would say that it fits the mold extraordinarily well. It lacks a few things in the list, if I can remember the list. Black Mass I have not seen. So yeah, it's... I would agree with this take. Next one here. So this one says, of course, producer wife would pick this one. I'll tell you the backstory, but it says, sometimes watching a film or reading a book after a spoiler makes it better. The reason this is here is because this is what Steph says sometimes, and it drives me insane. So she probably wants to hear me rant a little bit. I think per art form it matters, right? So like it matters in the art form where the spoilers matter. I've thought about this way too much, by the way. I'll probably do a mixed media on it, so I won't go on too long. But whether it matters depends on the art form. Film is sequential, okay? You literally line up frames one after another for sequence purposes. When you edit something, you edit it in the order that you want information and other things to be exposed to the audience. I think it's a little bit, whatever. I'll just be all out with my opinion. I think it's somewhat disrespectful if you're, sort of, unless you don't intend on watching something or you don't really care about it, I'll read stuff if I don't think I'll ever watch it or something like that. But in terms of like, if you want to go into the film, watching it as intended, films are built around sequence, right? So if you're watching it as intended, you won't spoil yourself, right? So you end up not watching the film as it was intended to be watched. And so you'll never get that experience back, right? You only get that the first time you watch it. It's an interesting thing, and then there's like the rewatchability and all that, but like the first time you watch a film, that's the native format of the film. First time in a theater is the native format of the film. And I promise you, I'm not weird about that directors definitely feel that way. Almost guaranteed. I would say maybe there's some genre things that might also play into there. Like, if it's like a campy, I'm thinking, I don't know why Scary Movie comes into my head, but Scary Movie, does it really matter as much? I don't know. I would still say I would not want to know anything about it, in terms of important details. But yeah, what's your opinion, Ben, on this one?
I mean, I don't know. Like, I'm not sure I can't really think of a time where I've had something like spoiled for me and then I've gone on to see it. And I'm not sure it would make it better, but like there are some things that are unavoidable. Like it'd be very hard today, unless you're like a kid who's never seen any, Star Wars film and your parents have sheltered you from the big surprise and Empire Strikes Back, which for the sake of us, I won't say what it is, but I mean, obviously everyone listening knows, right?
Right.
So you can't avoid it, right? And in that case, I mean, it's probably not better, but like it's unavoidable. So, other things like, well, I certainly know what's going to happen in certain, like, sometimes you can figure out what's going to happen without even having to have seen it. I mean, you could get, and to be fair, I haven't seen many Marvel films. I've seen like 5 or 6 of them, maybe. Yeah, I think 5. But like just knowing a few details about how things go, I mean, like I could have given you a reasonable guess about who was going to die in, an Endgame or whatever. And do I certainly I know now, like, would that if I ever choose to watch that, would that like kill the film for me? Probably not. But would it make it better? Probably not.
Yeah. In terms of like what you're responsible for, in terms of avoiding information, that's a different thing. I think like you said, like there's certain things you just can't avoid. It's more like, are you going to purposely like go and read the synopsis on Wikipedia or something like that? Like that, I think is like somewhat disrespectful, unless you don't intend on watching it or you really don't care about it, right? And which I think is a strong statement. If you were to imagine yourself saying that, I'm not saying that you have this responsibility to any of the filmmakers or anything like that. I'm not trying to be weird about it, but like, imagine you saying to a filmmaker, I'll just read the synopsis and maybe I'll like, it's like, the person will likely say to you, that's not how that's not how this works, Yeah, that's my opinion, but yeah, I'll probably rant about it in some long mixed media episode or something and give you 10 reasons why you should never do this. And then, then you can feel bad about your life. Just kidding. Cool. And we have one last one because we have a short episode today since it's only the 2 of us. This one is, let's see. Quentin Tarantino films aren't that good. Ooh, that's a hot take. That's definitely a hot take. I don't think Tarantino movies are as good as people say. The plot is usually nonsensical, and the climax is disappointing or wildly unrealistic. His feel-good vision for history is misinformation and leads to poor understanding of the real events and their consequences to the world. Also, they're too gory, but I understand that's not unpopular to most people. This somehow, 12 days ago, got 286 likes, which I think is perplexing, and 74% uploaded. I would love to know what subreddit this came from to get that good of a ratio, which, kind of surprises me. Quentin Tarantino is one of those directors that doesn't have a very high latitude for filmmakers who like him. So, like, what I'm saying is a lot of different kinds of filmmakers like Tarantino. And the reason is that he's extremely accessible in a lot of different ways, both to the audience and to like film lovers and to filmmakers. He's got this very unique style and genre that is very hard to replicate. I've seen a lot of people try, and usually it just feels like a replication of Tarantino. And so I love Tarantino films. I think they are underratedly gorgeous. Like, I think that's one of the most underrated parts of Tarantino, because people are so focused on the witty dialogue and the funny scenes and like the crazy gore and all that kind of stuff. But like the visuals are always ridiculously beautiful. So shout out to his DP and all that kind of stuff too. So yeah, I'll take this apart one by one. So the fact that they're unrealistic is kind of bizarre of a thing to say. This is cinema. Welcome to cinema. Things are unrealistic very often. You know, when you tell stories, they don't have to be real stories. I can tell you that even the stories that you think are realistic are not probably realistic in the, you know, perfect sense. I mean, you could even take a film like Saving Private Ryan, which is, you know, has high historical accuracy and is a historical fiction, and you could probably tear it to pieces if you wanted to, a la CinemaSins, you know, which I think is a tragedy when people do that kind of stuff to films and say, look, it's not. Well, stories and art in general are supposed to be art in general, right? You have to interpret in its context or what it's supposed to be doing for you, right? You don't want to go in and read a textbook thinking it's going to be an adventure fiction, right? You're never going to like the textbook, right? That's a weird example. I don't know why that came to my mind. But if you come to Tarantino expecting like a hyper-realistic or somewhat, you know, realistic film, this is definitely not the director for you. It's very over the top. He literally has a movie called Pulp Fiction, and you could just interpret everything he makes after that or before, everything he's ever made, as a type of Pulp Fiction, because that's really what it is. So, yeah, so I disagree with that. And then this person says, his feel-good version of history is misinformation and leads a poor understanding of the real events. Okay, well, if you're looking at Tarantino for a proper historical understanding of history, I think you're going to the wrong place. I wouldn't really suggest that if you're going to try to learn historical facts that you watch films at all. Maybe even, I can even think of examples that people give as like, oh, look at this thing that's from this era, that's a story. You know, it's still not the best way if you want like the pure factual firsthand evidence sort of understanding of what's going on. Tarantino likes history a lot, obviously. He's particularly obsessed with the history of Hollywood. And so, you know, if you're not into that, if you think he looks at everything with rosy eyes, I think he does too, but I think it's a purposeful cartoonish romanticism. It's not like it's not like he's saying everything was great. I mean, okay, take Django Unchained. This is a perfect example. Literally in the time of slavery, right? You know, I think it might still have the record for the most N-words in a film, right? So pretty extreme case here that we're talking about. Definitely makes light of the era. Definitely does. And I think that the difference between what he's doing there and someone who's actually being disrespectful or actually misinforming you is he's not asking you to accept what's happening in that film as historically accurate. He's asking you to accept it as a fun revenge movie, right? Where a former slave goes slaying a whole bunch of, you know, racist slave owners. That's what he's asking you to accept through the film, and it's freaking amazing. And also a gorgeous film. So, yeah, I disagree with this take. I think this person has a very narrow view coming to films and probably should, you know, open up a little bit to the films and ask yourself, what are they trying to do?
We have a question, Irving, in the chat from Stephanie Costello, referring to the previous take about spoilers. And she wants to know about movies, particularly, you know, that are kind of like a commonly redone story, and whether that you know, knowing you know what's going to happen, does that spoil your enjoyment of that sort of film. She gives the example of Little Women and the multiple versions of Little Women, including the one I referenced earlier.
Yeah, it's a very good. That's a very good question. I like that question. I think the difference though is when you're remaking a classic, you tend to well, it depends on the cultural atmosphere, right? It depends on whether that classic has gone out of favor in terms of the public consciousness. It depends on whether that classic is like basically a household story, like Batman, right, or something like that. And the difference, I would say, is that usually when you're remaking a classic, you have that in mind, that cultural atmosphere that you're in mind, and so you usually come at it from that direction. So if I'm making another Batman film, I know very likely everyone's going to know the backstory of Batman, right? And everyone's going to come to the movie with that in mind. So I'm going to write it that way, and I'm going to make it that way, with that in mind, right? I'm making this film for my particular cultural context. I think that filmmakers tend to have that in mind, and you can actually feel it a lot of times too when they're relying on your back knowledge of something. What's a good example of this? Joker. Joker is a good example of this. Joker is assuming you know everything about you know everything about the mystique of the character Joker, and it doesn't tell. It's called Joker, but there's no reference to the comics whatsoever throughout the entire film, right? It's expecting you to apply your understanding of the Batman universe to what's happening in front of you to create that sort of interesting thing. I think if you watch that movie without knowing anything about the Joker character in general, or about Batman, or about the themes that it's exploring that have been, traditionally explored in the comics, then you'll be very confused about what's going on in there. So I don't think it's much of a spoiler as it is just the context that you're in, and then filmmakers will adjust to that. And obviously it's not your fault if you know the cultural story or anything like that. And I think it would be more of a spoiler if you then took that and then you read the synopsis for that particular rendition of it, right? That filmmaker may want to flip something or do something interesting, subvert something.
But so. In that case, though, would it maybe that's the case where knowing something would make the film better, I suppose.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, you could put it that way. I guess when I think of spoilers, I think of it more as particular to the instance, right? And I think about it more in terms of what the filmmaker expects you to not know going in, right? If it's like assumptions about particular things, then yeah, I would agree that's not a spoiler. The filmmaker is literally assuming that you'll know that going in. Another good example is Tarantino film, the Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. I don't know that much about that. I actually know a lot more for completely unrelated reasons about that era of Hollywood than I did when I watched Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. So when I watched Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, that film went right over my head, like practically in almost like every way possible. And the reason why is because he wrote it for people who love that era and know a lot about that era. I consequently didn't really like the film that much, and I think the assumption was a little bit strong that people would know that much about that era. But now looking back at it, now that I know a lot more about that era, I see what he was doing with the film, and I'm like, oh, I see, I get it now, right? So in that sense, that information would have made the film better, knowing what the history was behind that film. Yeah, so those are my reactions to your hot takes. I really love these this week. They were nice and spicy, I think. So if you see this afterwards, if I happen to go back and respond to you with a link, none of what I said was supposed to be mean or anything like that. I just feel strongly about film, and you can disagree with me. I would love to hear your hot takes in the comments or wherever you want to send them. I'm pretty much guaranteed to respond to them next time if you send them in, because I love creating that kind of dialogue.
I don't want to cause no problems. I just want to live my life, but I keep on hearing about nonsense. Me and my dons ain't mobsters, but when you see imposters, we know how to read them faces, same way you know how to read them comments. If you want to talk, let's talk, but around here, make sure you're walking your talk is constant.